Pirate kings, pirate queens, non-binary monarchs of the sea. How we doing? What's going on? Another day, another deck profile in the countdown to OP07. We've gone through 3 so far, Perona, Moria, and Bonnie, and I'm going to hit you with another one. And I'll let you know right now, it's between this and number 1 for which deck I'm going to main this format. If you came here from one of the other videos, thank you so much. Hope you're enjoying them so far. But if this is your first time on the channel, here's a little bit about my process for these videos. I have gone through OnePieceTopDecks.com, SecondStorage.com, and Firefist.gg to log every single deck list that either won or topped a tournament in the Asian version of the Set 7 format, put them all into a giant spreadsheet, and assigned each list a point value based on the scale of competition of that tournament, the deck's placing in the tournament, and how far into the format that tournament took place. With that, I've been able to rank each leader as well as come up with a standard topping deck list for that leader, along with some very useful metrics on cost curve, amount of counter, number of 2K counters, non-counter characters, blockers, events, cards with a certain type even, as well as some tech choices and general popularity of cards that got used with each leader. I've also been reading a fair amount of Japanese articles from Note.com and doing some of my own testing to get further insight into these decks and why players made the choices they did, all for the purpose of getting us as ready as we can be for this set once it comes out over here. So thank you again for coming along, welcome to Sakura Kingdom, and let's get into the countdown to OP07. Now for number 4, this deck just will not die. The format will not close the game against him. One of my faves, it's ENEL. So, funny story, well, might be funny to some people. It's funny to me now. I gained a new appreciation for this deck during EB01 when almost all of my cards got stolen, and this was one of the only decks that I had left. And I'd written him off in the format since the data actually didn't place him that highly for EB01. Small sample size. That's neither here nor there. But that circumstance made me remember why I liked ENEL so much. I love me a nice, long game of One Piece. I love that adrenaline rush when my opponent's just close enough to closing out against me, but then boom! Trigger! Or I make sure that my opponent doesn't have enough swings on me, if I'm able to. And ENEL's got some nice control options, not full on like, say, Sakazuki was, or your standard black deck, but enough to get some real nice tempo going, limit our opponent's options, and big bodies to contest the board. And there are some really good yellow cards in OP07 that he can take advantage of. Before the ban in OP07, he was actually ahead of Sakazuki, ironically enough. And speaking of the ban, losing Reject does hurt the deck's control capabilities and its surprise lethal aspects to a degree, but we can make up for it just fine. We're still looking to take over the board just enough to make our opponent unable to lethal us, and play big bodies that heal us, and set up our own lethal once our back's against the wall. A fair amount of opponents might try to take their time against us, so we get the least out of our leader ability, so we don't keep looping that last life, seeing more cards, so Flampe can help build our hand up and get us closer to those extra heals. We don't have the Amaru activation condition to worry about in this list, but we really want to see those big bodies, so getting 2 cards deeper can go a long way as we move through our curve. And the 2-cost Shirahoshi blocker is another addition we got in EB01, and I love playing this card. Since she heals a life when she's KO'd by an effect, she always requires another attack from our opponent to get lethal, unless we're against Law or Blue deck, in which case she still has counter. It also feels great playing her alongside Katakuri on Tendon, so that we can tuck something on the opponent's board while still figuratively healing, or just going ham on our defenses. Our other 2-cost is Onami. This trigger to KO a 5-cost character can steal games, and is our one out to characters like Borsalino. We're not often using the banish for the sake of it, but another one of my favorite plays is giving that banish to either our leader, or ideally one of our higher cost characters that are already in play, then using another A-cost Katakuri to put her back into our life, and making the opponent have to try and play around her. Getting into some 2Ks, Beige is still goated, he's still protecting the homestead, and just look at this guy. No remorse, not a care in the world. And we have a new 2K in Frankie from Set 7. This trigger was made for ENEL, and it's pure power creep. You know, a year ago, in OP03, back in my day, our trigger characters made us discard one to play him. Then the Wano characters were dependent on our opponent's life, but Frankie, one, draws us a card, and he gets to hit the field just by virtue of ENEL doing what it's meant to do. Plus he swings 5k with no investment, and did I mention he's a 2k? One that we can put back in our life with a cost Katakuri? The card's busted. Your opinions may vary on the source material, but as far as Bandai's concerned, Egghead is Frankie's arc. Couple old favorites coming in next here. The 5-cost Shirahoshi is always welcome off of trigger, but if we don't have removal on 5, if our opponent doesn't give us a good target, or if we just need to fix our hand, we can hard play her in the mid-game to then filter some cards, and you guessed it, send her to life with Katakuri to keep the value going. Yeah, it doesn't get old. Gadatsu comes in handy against black decks like he has in previous sets, and against Law. As long as they don't play that 2-cost Sanji, he can easily get rid of a body and bait out their removal in the hopes that we run them out, so our big characters can take care of the game in 1 or 2 goes. Of course, there are some matchups where Gadatsu isn't going to help us against 5-cost characters since our opponent is multicolored. And that's where the loss of Reject really starts to hurt us, but we have a nice alternative. The yellow Sabo from Star Deck 13 didn't see much play in Black Yellow Luffy, but he has managed to find a home here in ENEL. He clears a 5-cost, think the yellow Luffy, think 5-cost Kid, even Cavendish or Gadatsu in the mirror. This removal is not contingent on either player's life total, and it then gets us closer to our lead ability, even if we have to trash one of those lives on the way. And then 7-cost Big Mom saw a fair amount of play in post-ban set 7. If you go first, she is an amazing play on turn 4 to reduce our opponent's access to cards in the long run, or to give us 1 extra card as the game goes on. In that time frame where she's best, to me that's a win-win. But she's very matchup dependent. She won't do much for you against Law, but if you're against Black, if you're against a majority of the decks in the format, she is still great in that spot. 2 feels good to me, but she is very cuttable if you're not vibing with her. Now, I've already discussed the ways that 8-cost Katakuri can combo with our smaller characters, but there are plenty of targets he can hit on the opponent's board. Moria, Kid, opposing 8-cost Katakuri, but he also shines against Law. If you give Law a 5th life, you're making every single one of their characters, with the possible exception of Ace, susceptible to our removal effects. And when it comes to that Ace, he's probably one of our best options to tuck since he's their biggest body and doesn't have counter. Yamato's still great for healing from 1 or 0 life while getting a potential KO. Now, if your opponent's keeping you at 2 to prevent that heal, and if you're looking for more bodies or maybe a Kingdom Come, and you're willing to get a little spicy, you could even play Flampe first for an effective draw 2 while still passing with 2 life. But, as with all these little silly, spicy plays, just weigh the potential trade-off of losing out on Yamato's KO by bringing you down to 1, or not drawing the counter to make up for Flampe if you're going to try this. And in a deck that thrives off of gigantic, high-cost characters, Yamato's no longer the ceiling. Our new boss character is the secret rare 10-cost Ace from set 7. On play, he heals you regardless of your current life total, and then if you're at 2 or less life, he gets to rush for 10k. This is the kind of range we look for with our Yamato shenanigans, so he fits perfectly in here and does wonders when we want to close the game out or get another attack on our opponent's board to make sure that we're not going to lose the next turn. When it comes to these high-cost characters, any one of them could be the right option once you get to those 10-don turns. It all depends on the particulars of the game state, so if you have options, figure out what you need most each turn, and just keep those big drops coming. We're also running 2 different events, both at a full 4 copies. You're the One Who Should Disappear turns our extra non-counters into value. 18's not the worst amount of non-counter, but running 4 copies also gives us the highest chance of putting it into life with our leader ability, and then getting a second heal on our opponent's turn. And then Kingdom Come is our answer to characters that our other removal isn't going to reach, especially 9-drop Zoro, as well as Ace, Yamato in the mirror if the timing is right, as well as those slightly smaller but still threatening characters when we don't have access to Katakuri or we don't want to put in our opponent's life. If you're in a matchup where you don't expect a lot of problems with taller characters and you're already low on life, and especially if you have multiple copies in hand, you can even use it on curve at 6, and then the trigger, which is essentially a Yamato KO effect, can put us ahead if we hit it early on. That's our list. Let's move into the card counts. You'll see off the bat that 9 of these cards are played in over 90% of lists. Everybody's running 4 Shirahoshi. Absolutely mandatory. Beige surprisingly drops off a little bit. Then once you get to Shirahoshi, Linlin, Sabo, Anami, we get into some more territory that has varied opinion among players. But they are still in the majority. Getting into these spicier picks, some players were opting for vanillas, Perospero if you really want something on 6 that isn't Raigo, Compote if you want to be able to hit 9 against Black Yellow Luffy, if you want another 7 drop that isn't as conditional or matchup dependent as 7 Mom. The new Luffy that had so many nicknames, Spacesuit Luffy, Egg Luffy, Anpanman Luffy, look up Anpanman. I didn't realize that was even a reference Oda was making with these new suits. Awesome. He stopped playing about a quarter of these decks in pre-ban and post-ban. I thought he was more popular pre-ban, but he was always a little on the fringe side. You can get a KO on a 4-cost either by seeing him off of trigger or by using his activate main effect, and the main effect even draws you a card, which ENEL loves. I feel like board presence is a big part of this format if we're able to have it. And if I had to choose between him and Sabo, I'd rather have that access to KO a 5-cost. Amaru's cheeky, though not as much of a necessity since we don't have to worry about Sakazuki anymore. I guess I could see some situations where it could come in handy against Law, especially if they have one of their 4 or 3-cost blockers on field. But I don't know how reliable that would be. I think Law is usually going to try and finish us off in 1 turn. And as much as I like heal triggers, giving up 2 cards for a heal trigger doesn't sound as fun to me. Rush Ace is valid. I like him. I think we just have better 5 costs. Nothing wrong with him. There's just other choices I'd rather play. Elthor's cool. Yellow Radical Beam, I'll always respect it. Personally, I want to use all my dough. Every turn. Every single turn. Like a solid 95% of my turns. And then we had a couple builds adding a Wano package in. To me, Hiyori feels like she's in a similar place with Ace. Still a good card. I for one, love stacking triggers. I think Frankie just bumped her space out. He and the blocker Shirahoshi kind of bumped Kikunojo out of the list as well. At this point, if I'm getting a trigger character, I don't want to pay for it. I'm spoiled now. Thanks, Frankie. And Shirahoshi's heal is much, much less conditional at this point. There were a couple of the promo 6-cost to 8k vanilla Kozuki Momonosuke as well. They're lumped in with Perospero as far as the math goes. Thunderbolt's another control option here. Does hit 5-cost on play. Doesn't have counter. If you're looking for more than the Sabo, I could see it. But I'm not, fiending for it. And I'd love to see a Brûlé off trigger. I just don't want to. I don't want to see it off trigger against Law. And then we got our little Hey Arnold looking homie Edison over here. Another 2k option. On play, if you have 2 or less life, you can draw 2, trash 2. The filter's cool. Don't get the trigger though, because we're not playing Old Man Vegapunk. It's just the same thing where he's outclassed by some other 2Ks. Not a bad card. As far as our cuts go, these are beautifully organized compared to the ones in the other videos. Sorry, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry about it. A Disappear or a Frankie are easily shavable. If you're not feeling the Linlin, if Onami doesn't cut the mustard for you, and if you don't feel like giving up that life off Sabo, all fair game to substitute for something else. That 5-cost Luffy was very close to making the cut, and then as you may have seen in the card count slides, more people played Linlin at 4 than they did at 2. It's just that the list playing her at 2 had higher achievements than the 4-ofs. Beyond that, some people went for a 3rd Sabo, and there is a solid argument to be made for these vanillas. And there we have it. That is ENEL in set 7. In my own testing, he was the bar with which I compared every other deck I tried. There are still a couple potential contenders, but for me, what strategies I tend to click with, it's between him and number 1 for me. I won't lie, I've got I'm tracking my expected win rate through 6 different metrics. 3 of them say ENEL, 3 of them say number 1. Hopefully I have a decision made by the time Gen Con hits and I have a big tournament. Hopefully. But thank you for visiting the Church of Arrogant M&M Doppelgangers. As always, if you're enjoying this, please leave a like. If you have your own thoughts on ENEL, let me know down below. And if you want to know when the next video comes out, if you want to get notified on that big Set 7 video on release day, I am always grateful for a new subscriber. This is Sakura Kingdom. I don't feel like listening to Eminem tonight. Ooh, I'm gonna check in with the homie. You haven't heard of him yet? Bling Arthur. He hasn't released anything, but you're gonna like him. You're gonna like him when he's around. Trust. But that's a conversation for another time. I'll see you in the next one.